Hi, I'm Lisa Ramirez, founding partner of U.S. Immigration Law Group. We understand that there's a tremendous amount of fear, anxiety, worry, stress in our immigrant communities. And it's not just our immigrants that are impacted. We also recognize that it's a lot of U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents, often who are burdened with the responsibility of taking care of younger siblings in the event that a parent is apprehended or detained. We want to make sure that you are educated, equipped, and empowered with the best information possible. Our office has been holding forums in the community to do just that, to help people understand what their constitutional rights are, but also just as important is what the government priorities are. What's really critical to know is that the government, as a practical matter, does not have the human or financial resources to apprehend, detain, or deport the nearly 12 to 14 million people here in the United States. So they need to prioritize, and it's important that everyone understands what those priorities are. So first and foremost, what's really critical to understand is that if you have any charges or criminal convictions or even arrests for any type of criminal activity, that would deem you a government priority. You may be very well of the passing of the Laken Riley Act, which basically really changes a lot about our justice system. We're accustomed to people being innocent until proven guilty. With the passage of this piece of legislation, the federal government can now apprehend and detain anyone just on a mere accusation. They don't need to be charged. They don't need to be convicted. And so you want to be extremely careful, both in terms of where you go and who you hang around with, because things have changed significantly. So if you have any criminal history whatsoever, whether they're arrests, whether they're charges, or whether they're convictions, it's super important that you speak with an immigration attorney so you understand how those apprehensions essentially affect your legal status. Secondly, if you've been previously ordered deported or removed, that is the second group of people that is also a priority for this government. So in instances where individuals already had their day in court, they already had the opportunity to have their case heard before a judge, there's going to be very little that any immigration attorney is going to be able to do. Obviously, people who are national security threats to this country would also be considered a priority. And then lastly, I would say individuals who have recently arrived, even those that have arrived on humanitarian parole programs, those have essentially been halted, and those individuals whose parole is expiring, or those individuals who are not properly admitted in the sense that they were not interviewed, they were not inspected, they were not properly processed, will be a priority for this government. Those of us who work with and for the immigrants in this community know that the majority of them do not fall under one of those priorities. So you want to make sure that if you do, that you are aware, that you are alert, that there may not be a lot of options in terms of what an immigration attorney can do to protect you. And then once you know those government priorities, what's equally important is to understand your rights. There's a lot of people in the community doing Know Your Rights presentations. I was very pleased to hear in terms of the borders are expressing frustration because it's clear that we have equipped our community with our constitutional rights. It's not just the rights for immigrants, it's the rights for anyone who's physically present in this country. Therefore, they're having difficulty. They're having difficulty apprehending individuals because I will tell you more often than not during the first administration, the majority of the people who were apprehended by ICE was not because they had an arrest warrant or a search warrant for them. It was because out of nervousness, people would volunteer information. They would answer questions they didn't need to answer. They would explain that they weren't born here, that they entered without papers, that they don't have status. All of that information, those admissions basically are basically a way that the government can apprehend and detain and deport those individuals. If you're not going to do their job, then you have a better chance of being able to remain in the United States. So what are our constitutional rights? First and foremost, you have the right to remain silent, right? So you don't need to speak. You do not need to share any information. You don't need to answer questions. You don't need to sign any document that you don't understand. You also have the right to call your attorney. And it's really critical that if you don't have an immigration attorney, that you do not wait until you're apprehended or detained to find one. Please, please, please look for an immigration attorney now. Do not wait. And there's several reasons for that. For one, an immigration attorney that already has your basic information. They know whether you have children born in the United States. They know when you entered. They know how long you've been here. They know if you have any criminal history that you should be concerned about. They will be able to respond very quickly in the event of an emergency. So that's one benefit. So even if you know or you believe that you cannot legalize your status, that isn't the purpose. The purpose is really to be able to have someone that you can contact in the event of an emergency. Secondly, it's really important that you understand what your options are if you have any options. And so many times people don't understand that there are legalization opportunities. We've even had it where individuals can be US citizens and they've acquired it through their grandparent. So it's very important to be able to speak with an attorney as soon as possible. It's also very important to make sure and beware of notaries or people who may take advantage of immigrants during this time. I've heard that there's many attorneys who are charging upwards of $1,000, $1,200 for a Form G-28. You do not need to have that form in hand. I think it gives our community a false sense of security. What you need to know is that your attorney has the capacity to complete that form and submit it with ICE as soon as possible. One of the challenges is when someone doesn't have an attorney who's already aware of their history, is that family members will often schedule consultations. Sometimes they have to wait several weeks for an appointment. And often, whether it's a brother or a sibling, a parent, a spouse, they often don't have the details that an attorney needs in order to respond. They may not know the dates of when you entered and if you've ever departed. They know you might have been in trouble, but they don't know exactly when. So it's really critical for you to have that information in an attorney's hands well in advance. In terms of preparedness, it's really important that you don't wait, that you take certain basic steps in order to be prepared. One of the analogies that I often use during the first Trump administration, and that is not to make light of the fires that took place in Los Angeles earlier this year, but is that we really do feel like firefighters. And sometimes these enforcement policies can be just as destructive in terms of separating families and destroying homes. And so if you know that there is a fire happening, please do not wait until to prepare for evacuation. There are things that you can do to prepare yourselves and to prepare your family. First and foremost, make sure you have all of your documents organized in a secure place where someone else knows where they are. Things like birth certificates, marriage certificates, passports, identification. If you have a child with special needs, their prescriptions, their medical records, their evaluations, important documents that someone else, in the event that they have to care for your children, would have access to. Second, you should obtain a power of attorney. A power of attorney is something that gives another individual the ability to perform business on your behalf. It is also a mechanism that you can use to give someone temporary emergency custody of your child. So in the event that you're detained, it is very difficult to get power of attorney when you're in custody. Powers of attorney need to be notarized, and it is very difficult sometimes for a notary to be able to have access to get those documents notarized once you're in detention. So a power of attorney would allow someone, for example, to have access to your funds in your bank, or to close a bank account in the event that you are deported, to sell vehicles, to close your apartment, whatever it is that you needed to have done and you're unable to do. Because let's face it, in the event that someone is apprehended, detained, and deported, the government doesn't give you an opportunity to basically leave, get out on bond, to be able to close up shop, to be able to take care of your personal business. So you need to make sure that someone else can do that for you. Thirdly, please make sure that you have identification, that you have a government issued ID, whether it's a foreign government ID like a passport or a consular ID card, both for yourself and for your children. Because in the event you are stopped by ICE, they can ask you for ID, and there's no reason not to show them your ID as long as it's, a government issued ID. It is better to show them a passport or a consular ID card, a driver's license, than it would be, say, to show them employment authorization card. But having some sort of ID is really critical, and it's better than having no ID at all. The reason for that is some people say, well, if I show them my, foreign government passport, if I show them my consular ID, then they're somehow going to know that I don't have papers in the United States. And that is not the case. In fact, there are many people that have not just one or two citizenships, but it can be 3, 4, or 5. So many of us have dual citizenship. So simply by showing identification of a foreign country is not sufficient for them to assume or presume that you do not have legal status. Next, also, please be sure if you have minor children that you've had a conversation with somebody, someone in your family, a trusted family friend, that in the event that you're apprehended, that they would be willing to assume responsibility in making their educational and medical decisions for them. You want to make sure that you have proper documentation, whether it's a power of attorney. Here in the state of California, we have an affidavit of a authorized caregiver that you can obtain. It is a document that is available online. We'll have it available on our website, the link to where you can download or print that document. Make sure you're using an English version of that document. And what that document will allow is that individual to be able to present it to a doctor, to a school, in the event that you are apprehended or detained. Now, that document is something that you're going to complete and you can print out, but you're not going to keep it, right? The idea is that you've got to give it to someone that you entrust your children to, and that they will then hold on to it. They will not sign it because it's only valid for 1 year. Now, in order to use that caregiver's document, it needs to be a family member. Now, it's quite an extensive list of family members that are included. It could be aunts, cousins, uncles, great aunt, great uncles, their spouses, grandparents, adult children that you may have. So if you have family, please make sure that you use that caregiver's affidavit to protect your children. And on a very, very basic level, please make sure that you have as many people as possible listed as an emergency contact with the school. The last thing you want to have happen is that no one comes to pick up your child and the school is thereby required to call social services. And during the first Trump administration, we had a lot of children that we had difficulty trying to help get out of the foster care system when a parent is not available to care for them. So really critical to do. What's really important for you always to have with you are 3 things. One is you want to carry your identification, right? Again, even if it is a foreign government ID. Because if you don't have ID, it is a legitimate reason that any law enforcement agency can take you down to the station in order to identify you. So you want to eliminate any reason why they would want to have to take you down to the station. Secondly, you're going to want to make sure you have your attorney's card that you can call, or make sure that's saved in your phone along with your consulate. You have 2 calls that you can make if you're in custody. One is to your attorney, the other one is to your consulate. Make sure you have those numbers readily available. And thirdly, many of you may have heard about the red card. The red card is a very important tool for you to carry with you. Our business cards, on the back side of our business cards, have the red card information. For those of you who are not familiar with the red card, what is red card? It is simply an opportunity for you to be able to show to any federal official or law enforcement agent that you are utilizing your constitutional rights. So typically in 1 or 2 languages, it'll say, that you are utilizing your constitutional right to remain silent, that you are not going to respond to any questions, that you are going to refuse to sign any document, and that you would like to call your attorney. So why that's so important is because we know people forget. They forget out of nervousness when they're confronted with a federal agent. They may start talking. So this can prevent you from talking. You show them the card, and that way you have communicated to them effectively that you want to utilize your constitutional rights. The other important factor is if you ever confront an immigration official at your place of work, please stay calm. Do not run. You have, again, the same rights to remain silent. If you run, they're going to go after the individuals who are running first. You do not need to assume that they are there for you. There are many reasons why ICE agents could appear at a place of work. They could be investigating the owner of that business. They can be doing an I-9 audit or inspection. There's no reason for you to be nervous. In order for ICE to apprehend someone without their permission, they must have an arrest warrant. And I will tell you, unless you're a government priority, ICE isn't going to go through the trouble and take the time and energy to go to a district court, to get a judge to review the evidence, to get that that arrest warrant. So chances are, if they show up your workplace, it really probably doesn't have much to do with most of the immigrants in our community. So please stay calm. You can always ask them if you're free to leave. You always have the right to call your attorney, and please do so as soon as possible. If ICE ever visits your home, again, please know, do not open the door. You do not need to open the door. They are not allowed into your premises. So you can ask them if they have a warrant, a search warrant, or an arrest warrant. They can show you through the window. They can slip it under the door. Make sure you ask for a warrant. And I know that there's a lot of community groups that spend a lot of time explaining the difference between an administrative warrant, a judicial warrant. Just remember this. It needs to have the name of the court. It needs to be signed by a judge. If it doesn't have a court name, then it's not a legal warrant, and you do not need to accept it, and you do not need to let them in. If you do let them in, then you also want to make sure that when you do, they're going to have access to every individual into that space. So I know there's been a lot of conversation and a lot of fear around the announcement of ICE enforcing its immigration enforcement efforts in schools and in churches. Please don't be alarmed. This was the policy prior to the Biden administration. It's not anything new. You do not need to be afraid to send your child to school. What you really need to understand is just by that policy change, it doesn't change the legal definition of where ICE can go in order to enforce our immigration laws. What does that mean? That means there's still the legal definition between public and private spaces. So just as if ICE were to visit your home, they cannot enter your home without an arrest or search warrant. They can't enter classrooms. They can't enter workplaces and private spaces. Now, what you really need to know is that in the public spaces, right, that is free game. ICE can enter any public space, including lobbies, parking lots, sidewalks. So do they stop people leaving and going to private spaces? Yes, they can, which is why it's so important for you to understand both your constitutional rights and understand that there are places and spaces that are still protected by our laws. Another executive order I want to just mention very briefly, because when it came out, we received a large number of calls, and that has to do with the end to birthright citizenship. Please know that it's not possible for the President of the United States to amend our Constitution by executive order. I believe that Trump and his legal team must be aware of this as well. So I can't help but think that it is really just a messaging tactic to create the fear, the worry, the concern, the panic that it has effectively done. So please know that to amend our Constitution, it would require 2/3 of Congress to agree and to pass that amendment. Secondly, 75% of our states would also need to agree to that amendment. So it's not something that's very easy that can be done. Have there been people very worried that their child would lose their citizenship, that they would lose their citizenship? Yes, but they don't need to worry and they don't need to be concerned. Also, we've received a lot of phone calls of US citizens, people who have naturalized. Again, unless you've committed fraud or misrepresentation or you've lied on your application, the federal government is not going to take away your US citizenship. And I want to say something in particular to our DACA recipients. I know you're really worried. It's hard for those of us who've been practicing in this area for so long that, here we are 13 years after DACA was created, still talking about the DACA program because we thought it was going to be a short-term solution. Please know that the future of DACA is in the hands of the court. It is not in the hands of the president. Just a few weeks ago, we had the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals make a ruling. Part of it was deemed to be unlawful, right? That impacts the DACA recipients in Texas. But the rest of the legal issues were remanded down to the district court. What does that mean? That means we have time. We have time before we need to be concerned about DACA. That decision will need to go back up to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals and then eventually to the Supreme Court. That is unlikely something that we're going to see in this particular year, right? So please continue to renew your DACA. Please utilize the protections and the work authorization that it avails you. Please file your DACA renewal as soon as possible, which is 150 days in advance. Do not wait until the last minute. So many DACA recipients wait until the last minute, and it's very unfortunate because they don't get the automatic extension. You do run the risk of being placed on administrative leave, or worse, let go from your job. So please be sure that you are applying for DACA and renewing your DACA as soon as possible. The last thing I just want to mention is I want to make sure that our community is being extra careful with the agencies that they're providing their information to. So you want to think twice, right? Any application, whether it's to the FBI, the IRS, know that that information is part of a federal database, right? That immigration and Immigration Customs Enforcement can use to be able to apprehend and detain people. So our office is being extra careful. So for people who want to request, a copy of their file under the Freedom of Information Act, we're utilizing our address as the mailing address and not our client's address. Why? Because we need to be extra careful. Now, that doesn't mean or impact the agencies here in the state of California. Now, I know many of you live in other states, so you may want to be careful because in certain states there are cooperations and agreements in place where local law enforcement can help enforce our federal immigration laws. Here in the state of California, we have a law called SB 54 that essentially prevents state agencies from sharing your information with the federal government. But again, you want to be very, very careful. So for those of you who are undocumented, who have taxpayer identification numbers, you may want to think twice before filing your taxes. Now, I'm not telling you not to, because there are many cases in which it may be a good idea to file your taxes. For example, if you have a young adult who may be entering college that wants to be able to access, federal grants, part of the FAFSA process is showing that you've filed those taxes. So again, it's up to you to really weigh the pros and cons and the benefits of providing your information to the federal government. So all in all, I just want to make sure that you understand, again, your constitutional right to remain silent, to not answer questions, don't sign documents, and please call your attorney. And coupled with that, the government priorities, those with criminal history, including arrests, those that have been previously ordered removed or deported, those that have recently arrived. So if you fall into one of those categories, again, and you need any assistance, feel free to reach out to our office. We're here to support, and we're going to be continuing these efforts to educate our community with the best information possible. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and I hope you found this information helpful.